At 6:47 in the morning on September 14, 1944, the most dangerous thing in the Austrian Alps wasn't the German anti-aircraft guns. It wasn't the radar stations or the fighter patrols. It was silence. High above the Innsbruck Valley, a single American fighter plane was falling out of the sky on purpose. The pilot, Captain James Doc Harrison, sat in the cramped cockpit of a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, watching his altimeter unwind like a broken clock. This wasn't engine failure. This wasn't battle damage. This was a calculated act of insanity. Harrison had just done something no pilot is ever supposed to do. He had reached forward with his gloved hand and pulled the red mixture control lever all the way back to idle cutoff. The massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine had coughed once, backfired with a bang that rattled his teeth, and died. The four-bladed propeller, which a moment ago had been an invisible blur of spinning metal clawing to the thin mountain air, was now frozen solid. It stuck out from the nose like four stiff fingers pointing at death. The roar that filled Harrison's ears since takeoff, the chest-thumping thunder of 18 cylinders firing 40 times per second, vanished. It was replaced by something far more terrifying. Wind. Just wind. A high-pitched whistle as 320 miles per hour of freezing alpine air screamed over the canopy. Harrison could hear things he'd never heard before in flight. The creaking of the aluminum wing spars flexing under the G-load. The rattle of his knee bored against his thigh. His own breathing, ragged and fast inside the rubber oxygen mask. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not designed to glide. It was a flying tank, a 7-ton monster built to absorb punishment and dish it out. The British called it the Jug because it was shaped like a milk jug, fat, round, and impossibly heavy. Spitfire pilots mocked it. They said the Americans had strapped wings to a school bus. They joked that if you wanted to evade a German fighter, an AP-47, you just unbuckled your harness and ran laps around the cockpit. But Harrison wasn't thinking about jokes. He was thinking about physics. Without engine power, the Jug had the glide ratio of a crowbar. It fell. It didn't soar. It didn't float. It dropped toward the earth at 2,000 feet per minute, and the only thing keeping it from spinning into the ground like a lawn dart was speed. Harrison pushed the nose down steep. He watched the airspeed indicator climb. 250 miles per hour. 280. 300. The heavy fighter was a bobsled now, a guided missile made of aluminum and rivets, hurtling down an invisible slope carved into the sky. He was committed. There was no going back. If the engine didn't restart when he needed it, there would be no second chance. No bailout. No control crash landing in a farmer's field. The mountains below were vertical granite cliffs and frozen rivers. If he hit them at 300 miles per hour, they wouldn't find enough of him to fill a shoebox. But Harrison had done the math. He knew the German defenses. He knew their weakness. And he knew that sometimes the only way to win was to stop making noise. To understand why a sane man would turn off his engine in the middle of a combat zone, you have to understand the target. The Brenner Pass was the lifeline of the German war machine in Italy. It was a narrow, twisting valley that cut through the Alps, connecting Austria to northern Italy. It was the only road that mattered. Every Tiger tank, every artillery shell, every drop of fuel the Germans needed to fight the Allies in Italy had to come down this pass. And they came by train, massive locomotives pulling 40-car convoys of death. The Allies knew this. They'd been trying to cut the Brenner Pass for months. High-altitude bombers had tried. They dropped thousands of tons of bombs from 20,000 feet, aiming for the rail lines and bridges. Most of the bombs missed. The ones that hit just cratered the dirt next to the tracks. The Germans had repair crews that could fix a blown section of track in 3 hours. Fighter bombers had tried. P-47s and P-38s would roar down the valley at treetop level, guns blazing, rockets streaking toward the trains. But the moment the German sound detectors picked up the rumble of American engines, sirens wailed. Train engineers slammed the throttles forward and drove their locomotives into the tunnels. The mountains were solid granite. A train inside a tunnel was invincible. You could drop a 2,000-pound bomb on top of the mountain, and the train wouldn't even feel it. But there was one tunnel that mattered more than all the others. Intelligence called it Target Zebra. It was a rail tunnel carved into the side of a vertical cliff near the town of Steinach. It was 800 feet long, with a reinforced concrete entrance built into the rock face. A steel overhang protected the mouth of the tunnel from bombs dropped from above. It was a fortress, and guarding it was the most lethal flak battery in the entire sector. Four quad-mounted 20mm cannons positioned on a concrete platform 200 feet above the tunnel entrance. These weren't just machine guns. These were flak-reeling 38s, German engineering at its most brutal. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute. For guns meant 3,200 rounds per minute. The math was simple and horrifying. If you flew within 2 miles of that tunnel with your engine screaming, the German sound locators would pick you up. The gunners would be waiting, and they would fill the sky with so much lead that a sparrow couldn't fly through it. American pilots called it the zipper. If you tried to attack target zebra, the zipper closed on you, and you died. Captain James Harrison had been flying P-47s in the Mediterranean theater for 8 months. He'd flown 60 missions. He'd strafed convoys, bombed bridges, and tangled with German fighters over the Adriatic. He was good at his job, but he was tired of losing friends to the zipper. 2 weeks earlier, he'd watched his wingman, a kid from Ohio named Tommy Reeves, get caught in the flak over the Brenner Pass. One moment, Reeves was flying formation off Harrison's right wing. The next moment, a 20mm shell punched through his cockpit and detonated. The P-47 disintegrated. No parachute, no radio call, just a ball of fire tumbling into the valley. Harrison had flown home in silence that day. He'd sat in the debriefing tent, staring at the mission map, listening to the intelligence officer drone on about acceptable losses and strategic objectives. That night, Harrison couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring at the canvas roof of the tent, listening to the wind. And then he remembered something, a story his flight instructor had told him back in training. The instructor, an old barnstormer from the 1920s, had once shut off his engine mid-flight to win a bet. He glided his biplane 3 miles to impress a girl at a county fair. Harrison had thought it was a stupid stunt, dangerous, pointless. But now, staring at the ceiling, he wondered, what if you could glide a fighter plane? What if you could shut off the engine and become invisible to the sound detectors? What if you could sneak up on the zipper before it even knew you were there? The next morning, Harrison took his P-47 up for a solo patrol. He told the tower he was doing a navigation exercise. He climbed to 10,000 feet over the Adriatic Sea, far from any German radar. He checked his parachute. He said a quick prayer, and then he pulled the mixture lever. The engine died. The silence hit him like a physical blow. The nose dropped. The altimeter started spinning backward. He was falling, but he wasn't panicking. He grabbed the propeller control and shoved it forward to course pitch. The big 4-bladed prop twisted, cutting through the wind instead of fighting it. The drag vanished. The plane stopped shaking. It smoothed out. Harrison pushed the nose down until the airspeed hit 280 miles per hour. And then something magical happened. The P-47 stopped falling and started gliding. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't efficient. But it worked. He was descending at 1,500 feet per minute, but he was covering ground. He did the math in his head. Starting at 12,000 feet, diving at this angle, he could glide for maybe 7 or 8 miles. That was the magic number. The German sound detectors had a maximum range of about 10 miles, but they were designed to track engines climbing or cruising. They weren't listening for a whistling brick. Harrison glided for 3 miles. His altitude dropped to 4,000 feet. His heart was hammering. This was the test. Could he restart the engine? He slammed the mixture back to rich. He pushed the throttle forward. He hit the starter. Nothing. The propeller turned slowly, fighting the wind resistance. The engine was cold. The cylinders weren't firing. Harrison's hands started to shake. He was going to crash into the ocean. But then one cylinder coughed. A puff of black smoke shot from the exhaust. Another cylinder fired. Then 5. The engine roared back to life with a violent shudder that shook the entire airframe. Harrison pulled back on the stick. The heavy fighter clawed its way back into the sky. He leveled off at 8,000 feet, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. It worked. He could glide. He could restart. He could become a ghost. Harrison didn't tell anyone about his experiment. Not yet. He needed proof. He needed a real target. 3 days later, intelligence reported a high-value train parked inside Target Zebra. It was a munitions convoy. 30 boxcars loaded with artillery shells and explosives heading south to resupply the Gothic line. If that train reached the front, it would kill hundreds of American soldiers. The squadron commander, a battle-worn major named Hutchins, briefed the mission in the pre-dawn darkness. He pointed at the map with a wooden pointer, his face grim. Target Zebra, same as always. Heavily defended. The flak battery is operational. We'll approach from the south, dive from 15,000 feet, and try to skip bomb the entrance. It's a low percentage shot, but it's all we've got. Harrison raised his hand. Sir, I'd like to volunteer for a solo run. Different approach. The major looked at him like he'd just volunteered for a suicide mission. Solo? Doc, that flak will shred you before you get within 3 miles. Not if they don't hear me coming. The room went quiet. Harrison walked to the map. He explained his plan. Climb to 12,000 feet. Approach from the north, from behind a mountain. Cut the engine. Glide down the valley in silence. Drop the bombs at point-blank range. Restart and climb out. The major stared at him. You want to shut off your engine? On purpose? Yes, sir. That's insane. Yes, sir, but it'll work. The major looked at Harrison for a long moment. Then he looked at the map. Then he sighed. If you crash into a mountain, I'm not writing a letter to your mother explaining that you turned off your own engine. Understood, sir. And if you pull this off, I'm recommending you for a psych eval. Fair enough, sir. At 0600 hours, Harrison strapped into his P-47. The ground crew had loaded 2 500-pound bombs under the wings. The crew chief, a grizzled sergeant from Tennessee, shook his head as he helped Harrison with his harness. I heard what you're planning, Captain. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Probably, Harrison said, but I'm tired of losing friends. The chief patted the side of the fuselage. This bird's tough. She'll bring you home. Harrison fired up the engine. The big radio coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. The noise was incredible, a deep, chest-rattling thunder that shook the ground. He taxied to the runway, ran through his checklist, and pushed the throttle forward. The P-47 thundered down the dirt strip, heavy with fuel and bombs. At 110 miles per hour, Harrison pulled back on the stick. The fighter clawed into the sky, climbing into gray pre-dawn light. He turned north toward the Alps. The mountains rose ahead of him like jagged teeth. Snow-covered peaks glowed pink in the early morning sun. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deadly. Harrison climbed to 12,000 feet. The air was thin and cold. Ice crystals formed on his windscreen. He switched his oxygen to 100% and checked his instruments. Oil pressure good, fuel good, bombs armed. He was 10 miles south of Target Zebra. He could see the valley ahead, a dark slash cutting through the white mountains. This was the point of no return. Harrison took a deep breath. His gloved hand hovered over the mixture control. Every instinct in his body screamed at him not to do this. Pilots don't shut off engines. Engines keep you alive. But Harrison thought about Tommy Reeves. He thought about the fireball. He thought about all the other pilots who died trying to attack this tunnel. He pulled the lever. The engine banged once and died. The silence rushed in. The nose pitched down. Harrison fought the controls, forcing the plane into a controlled dive. He shoved the prop lever to course pitch. The propeller blades twisted and froze. The wind screamed over the canopy. He was falling, 280 miles per hour, 300, 320. The valley floor rushed up to meet him. He was below the mountain peaks now, descending into the canyon. The granite cliffs rose up on either side of him like the walls of a tomb. This was the most dangerous part. If a German spotter saw him, if they fired a flare, the plan was over. But the spotters were looking south. They were scanning the horizon for the sound of engines. They weren't looking behind them. They weren't looking at the glider falling out of the sun. Harrison adjusted his trim. Without engine power, the controls were heavy. He had to use both hands to keep the nose steady. The altimeter was unwinding fast. 8,000 feet. 6,000 for 1,000. And then he saw it. Target zebra. The dark mouth of the tunnel carved into the cliff face. The concrete overhang. The steel tracks disappearing into the mountain. And sitting on the platform above the tunnel, the quad 20mm guns. He could see the gunners. Tiny figures standing around their weapons, smoking cigarettes, scanning the southern sky. They had no idea. Harrison was 3 miles out. He lined up his approach. He was coming in from the north, from behind the mountain, at an angle the flak guns couldn't cover. He was too low, too fast, and too silent. He was a ghost. 2 miles. His airspeed was bleeding off. 280 miles per hour. 260. The heavy fighter was getting sluggish. He needed to time this perfectly. 1 mile. He could see the train now. A long black snake of boxcars half hidden inside the tunnel. The locomotive was deep inside, but 10 cars were still exposed. Harrison aimed for a spot 50 yards in front of the tunnel entrance. He was going to skip the bombs, let them bounce off the gravel rail bed, and roll into the tunnel like bowling balls. 500 yards. A German spotter on the cliff above turned his head. He saw the glint of sunlight on Harrison's canopy. The man froze. He raised his binoculars. His mouth fell open. He grabbed for his flare pistol. But he was too late. Harrison yanked the bomb release. 2 500-pound bombs dropped from the wings. The P-47 lurched upward, suddenly 1,000 pounds lighter. The bombs tumbled through the air. They hit the gravel between the tracks. They didn't explode. They were set with 4-second delay fuses. They skipped. Once. Twice. 3 times. They bounced into the darkness of the tunnel and disappeared. Harrison didn't wait to watch. He had a bigger problem. He was 200 feet off the ground, moving at 220 miles per hour, heading straight for a granite cliff, and his engine was dead. This was the moment that would either make him a legend or a stain on the rocks. He slammed the mixture to rich. He shoved the throttle to full power. He mashed the starter button. The propeller turned. Slowly, too slowly. The engine was cold. The oil was thick. The fuel wasn't reaching the cylinders. Harrison could see individual cracks in the cliff face. He could see moss growing on the rocks. He screamed into his oxygen mask. "Start, you bastard! Start!" 1 cylinder fired. Then 3. Then all 18. The engine exploded to life with a roar that echoed off the canyon walls. Harrison hauled back on the stick with both hands. The P-47 groaned under the G-force. The nose pitched up. The belly of the fighter cleared the top of the flak platform by inches. The German gunners looked up just in time to see 7 tons of American steel roar over their heads. Their cigarettes fell from their mouths. Harrison went vertical. He climbed straight up the face of the cliff, engine howling at emergency power. And then the mountain moved. Inside the tunnel, the 2 bombs detonated simultaneously. But they didn't just destroy a section of track. They triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The train was loaded with high explosives, artillery shells, mortar rounds, demolition charges. When Harrison's bombs went off, they set off the first boxcar. That boxcar set off the second. The second set off the third. 30 boxcars of explosives detonated inside a granite tunnel. The pressure wave had nowhere to go. It couldn't go up through 1,000 feet of solid rock. It couldn't go down through the earth. It had to go out. The tunnel became a cannon barrel. A tongue of orange fire 300 feet long shot out of the tunnel entrance. The blast was so powerful it lifted the concrete overhang and threw it across the valley like a playing card. The flak platform disintegrated. The quad 20mm guns, the bunker, the gunners. Everything vaporized in an instant. The shock wave hit Harrison's plane like a giant fist. The P-47 bucked and yawed. The controls went wild. Harrison fought the stick, wrestling the fighter back under control. He looked back over his shoulder. A mushroom cloud of black smoke and orange fire was rising out of the valley, climbing higher than the mountain peaks. The tunnel entrance was gone. The tracks were gone. The train was gone. Harrison leveled off at 15,000 feet. His hands were shaking. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might crack a rib. He keyed his radio. His voice was hoarse. "Base, this is Hammer 1. Target Zebra is destroyed. Repeat, target Zebra is destroyed. Returning to base." The radio crackled. The major's voice came through, disbelief clear in every word. "Hammer 1, say again. Did you say destroyed?" "Affirmative. The tunnel is gone. The train is gone. Everything is gone." There was a long pause. Then, "Get your ass back here, document, and bring a full report. Command is going to want to hear this." Harrison smiled inside his oxygen mask. He patted the instrument panel. "Good girl," he whispered to plane. "You beautiful, ugly, flying brick." The flight back was the longest 30 minutes of Harrison's life. He kept replaying the dive in his head. The silence, the speed, the restart. Any one of 100 things could have gone wrong. If the engine hadn't restarted, if a spotter had seen him 5 seconds earlier, if the bombs had bounced wrong. But they hadn't. It had worked. When Harrison landed, the entire squadron was waiting on the flight line. They'd heard the radio call. They'd heard about Target Zebra. The major stood with his arms crossed, waiting. Harrison climbed out of the cockpit. His flight suit was drenched with sweat. His legs were weak. He sat on the wing for a moment, just breathing. The major walked up. He looked at Harrison. He looked at the empty bomb racks. He looked at the propeller. Then he shook his head. "That," the major said, "was the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I've been flying since 1940. Harrison lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "Did it work?" "Work? Doc, you didn't just destroy the tunnel. You moved the damn mountain. Intelligence says the rail line is cut for at least 2 months. Maybe longer. That train was carrying enough explosives to level a city." Harrison took a long drag. "Good." The major clapped him on the shoulder. "Get some rest. And then you're going to teach every pilot in this squadron how to do what you just did." "Sir, that's an order. If we can hit targets in silence, we can win this war faster. You just open a door, document. Now we're all walking through it." The silent glide didn't become standard procedure. It was too dangerous for that. But over the next 3 months, as the Allies pushed north through Italy, the tactic spread to fighter squadrons like wildfire. Pilots started calling it the ghost run. When the target was too hot, when the flak was too thick, when conventional attacks were suicide, they would climb high, cut their engines, and fall like silent stones. The Germans never figured it out. They upgraded their sound detectors. They added more flak batteries. They built stronger bunkers. But they couldn't defend against an enemy they couldn't hear. By December 1944, the Brenner Pass rail line was cut in so many places that German supply convoys had to be rerouted hundreds of miles out of their way. The Italian front, which had been a bloody stalemate, began to collapse. Harrison flew 22 more missions before his tour ended. He never had to do another ghost run. Once was enough. When he rotated home in January 1945, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement in aerial flight and conspicuous gallantry in the face of enemy fire." It didn't mention the part where he shut off his engine. That detail was classified. Command didn't want the enemy or the press to know that American pilots were deliberately killing their engines in combat. It sounded too reckless, too insane, but the pilots knew. In the ready rooms and the mess halls, they told the story. The legend of the pilot who turned off his engine at 12,000 feet and dropped the bomb into the tunnel. Harrison went home. He took off the uniform and put on a suit. He became an aeronautical engineer. He worked on civilian aircraft. He raised 3 kids. He mowed his lawn on Saturdays and grilled steaks on Sundays. He was a quiet man. When people asked about the war, he usually just said, "I flew fighters in Italy." He didn't talk about the silence. Most people wouldn't understand. How do you explain that the most terrifying moment of your life was also the most peaceful? How do you describe what it feels like to fall through the sky in a 7-ton glider with nothing but wind and physics keeping you alive? Harrison died in 1998. He was 79 years old. At his funeral, 3 men in leather flight jackets showed up. They were gray and stooped, but they stood straight when they saluted the casket. One of them, a man who'd flown ghost runs over Austria, gave a eulogy. He didn't talk about medals or missions. He talked about courage. Doc Harrison, he said, taught us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is shut up and listen. He taught us that silence can be a weapon. And he taught us that when everyone says something is impossible, sometimes you just have to pull the lever and prove them wrong. The P-47 Thunderbolt hangs in museums now. People walk past it, reading the plaques about horsepower and armament. They see the guns. They see the armor. They imagine the roar. They don't see the glider. They don't know that inside that brutal, ugly machine was the soul of a hawk. They don't know that on a cold September morning in 1944, a pilot named Harrison did something that defied everything that plane was built for. He made it silent. He made it invisible. And he changed the war. The next time you see a P-47, don't just look at the engine. Look at the propeller. Imagine it frozen. Imagine the wind whistling over the wings. Imagine the courage it took to reach forward and kill the roar. That's the real story. Not the bombs, not the explosions, but the silence before the storm. That's the sound of victory.